Hayley Atwell, you star in the new Howard's End miniseries as Margaret Schlegel. It's based, of course, on the novel by E.M. Forster. What were your initial thoughts when the opportunity came to play this character?
Why and how is Kenny Lonergan involved in this? And it was the main reason why I wanted to do it. I'd just recently seen Manchester by the Sea, and I knew that he was a very loved writer, and the actors loved working with him because he writes humans really well. He writes character really well and very naturalistic. And so to have someone like him involved in writing that's, you know, could be potentially in the wrong hands, feel a bit stuffy or a bit too literary and therefore inaccessible to modern day audiences, I knew that he would take it in a very accessible and kind of direction with a real lightness of touch to it.
Yeah, and you know, Kenneth Lonergan, of course, you know, from Manchester by the Sea, and You Can Count on Me, and a number of plays that he's also written. Definitely not the first person you'd think of for a British literary adaptation. What did you think of his actual scripts that he brought to them ultimately when you read them?
I read them really quickly because they just seemed to kind of jump off the page, and there's a pace to them which I loved. Really fast paced. This kind of, again, this wit and this lightness of touch that that you see on the screen. But there were some scenes that were quite tricky to read because you'd have 4 or 5 actors talking over each other at the same time. So you'd have them all kind of on the page, like almost in columns with slash marks of when we come in. So it was almost like a musical score at some point. And you knew you had to learn your lines, but also be aware of when you're going to be cut off. And you've got to kind of keep going, although an actor or another character is talking over you. So that was quite exciting. And we knew from then that that's going to have kind of comic nuances to it, where you have 2 characters who know each other so well that they can talk over each other and finish each other's sentences because they know what each other's thinking. So for me as an actor, it was kind of, it felt like the script was telling us how to do it.
And that's interesting. It seems like especially complicated. You almost have to choreograph your way through the dialogue. Was that a complicated way to work to try and, you know, to make that spontaneous, but also to know what the plan is to come in and, you know, the interruption and to have the right, you know, a comic effect?
Yeah, well, that's why it felt like we were filming a play. So in the morning, each scene that we do, we'd rehearse with the director and just the set, and the rest of the crew would wait and they would set up, but very much it was the set belonged to the actors and the director. And so we figured out physically where we were going to be, what props we were going to use. We'd kind of get used to the language and in kind of just kind of running lines with each other very quickly. So it felt that on action, we weren't thinking about what our lines were. They were so embedded in us that we knew that we could play with it and we could make choices because we knew it like the back of our hands. And that, yeah. And so I think for us, that's why on screen, it ends up looking like it's a very lived in piece, that you feel that you're walking into a world that's fully inhabited as opposed to mannered actors awkwardly kind of sitting around with cups of tea with an arched eyebrow. You know, it has life to it because we've rehearsed it enough to make sure that that we find kind of new ways of telling the story through, you know, our physical gestures and our use of the objects in front of us.
And how familiar, if at all, were you with the original novel before you took the role? Had you read it or studied it, you know, prior to this?
No, I hadn't read that book. So I kind of came to it, reading it, imagining it visually, because obviously we were going to be adapting it. So it felt kind of useful as a backdrop for detail. So we had, for example, the art department would come to us and say, we're putting together the sets for your drawing room and your bedrooms. And are there things that are in the book that are not in the script in terms of descriptions of things that you want to see in these rooms? So I felt that throughout the book, Margaret's into she's into books and writing letters. So we wanted to make sure that there was kind of books piled around, not kind of neatly necessarily put away, but there were kind of books kind of fallen over and spilling out of bookshelves. And then also that there were just letters everywhere and beautiful stationery and pens everywhere. And then for Helen, played by Pip, she liked the idea of Helen, the description of the book of how kind of artistic she is and She wanted to have watercolors available to her so she could use that in the scene. And then also Alex Lauder, who played Tibby, wanted to have his fossil collection, which is mentioned in the book. So that was when I think for us the book became very useful.
The book was also adapted into a 1992 film, Merchant Ivory film. Had you known that film very well?
Yeah, I think there are very few people on the planet who don't know that film. And because of the amazing performances in it and how beautiful it was and how much impact it had at the time, you know, with all its Oscar nominations and its wins. And you know, Merchant Ivory seemed to be of that time very much kind of adapting that kind of world really well. And so I didn't see the film again. I know Em and spoke to her about it, and she was adamant, as she would be with all things, like not to watch other people's interpretations of the work that you're about to do, because it's, you don't want to kind of get lost in or kind of get confused as to trying to almost impersonating someone else, because as another human being, you're going to say things and deliver things differently and convey things differently and interpret things slightly differently. So, you know, I think also Matthew and I were feeling that because both of these characters are such kind of great characters for actors to play, we were just delighted to have a bash at it. You know, it's a bit like, kind of for me, Margaret Schlegel being in kind of the canon of great roles for women. And, you know, lots of actresses want the chance to play what those roles are, whether it be Lady Macbeth or Therese Raquin or Hedda Gabler, or Cleopatra, that you have a chance to have a go at them. You know, that's what we kind of felt like when we came to this project.
And, you know, your co-star Matthew Macfadyen, who plays Henry Wilcox, you know, one of your primary co-stars in the miniseries, but not the first time you've worked with him. You were also love interests in Any Human Heart. You were in The Pillars of the Earth together. How is it working with him again in these particular roles?
It was like working with an old friend. You know, we had such a fun time on both those other projects, and we hadn't seen each other for a while. But when you're working on a new project and you're working with an old friend, the ice is already broken. So you know exactly how each other likes to work, and there's where the kind of natural rapport is between you. And we felt that, you know, we wanted to take the work seriously, but not ourselves. So we made sure that we had a lot of fun, and we played heads up, and we just goofed around, and we would play pranks on each other. And that actually kind of, you know, keeps the ball in the air in a way, because the banter is very kind of back and forth, and both his characters are so quick and so witty and articulate that in between scenes we wanted to make sure that we kind of kept that going. So we had a lot of fun together. He's a really wonderful human being, and he's got this kind of very, without being sentimental, this incredibly emotional depth to what he does. But yet with what he does with Mr. Wilcox is because Mr. Wilcox is effectively emotionally constipated. You're aware of so much that Matthew's character is feeling without him being emotive about it. He still does the kind of, is very skilled in going, you can see it, all the inner workings of this man who's kind of trying to figure out as he goes along, and is kind of in awe of this woman, but she's so different and vastly opposed to all his views. So you can see all those kind of things going on internally, but at the outside, he's this staunch capitalist alpha male of his time, with his own kind of limitations and his own kind of facade of that. And I think it takes a very skilled actor to be able to convey both. You know, and Matthew does that so brilliantly. You know, and his comic timing is so subtle and contagious.
And Margaret seems very practical about Henry often, and what he can offer her. It doesn't feel like a romance to start. You know, when you know they meet, and it seems like a lot of a transaction to a certain degree, up to a certain point. Do you look at their relationship as a love story purely?
Yeah, I do, and love in a bigger sense, not just about romantic love, because there's relatively little of that in comparison to other qualities of their intimacy. I think there's a connection that they both have, and I think he sees something in her that he saw in his first wife. And at the beginning of the episode, you see her having this bond with his first wife. That's almost like she has this girl crush on her, but yet she's very different. Again, she has very different social and political views, and she believes that Margaret believes women should have the vote, and Ruth Wilcox she says that she's just relieved that she doesn't, and that politics should be left up to the men. And despite their differences, they find this common humanity and this kind of kindred spirit. And so that's then, later on when Margaret ends up with Mr. Wilcox, I think he sees her as someone who has these kind of very admirable qualities, and is sometimes quite in awe of them. She's quick to forgive, and I think he's taken aback by that, and it almost kind of makes him feel worse about himself, how compassionate she is, and how kind of wise she is, and that she allows space for human error with the people that she loves. And I think that's kind of rare quality. So he doesn't quite know what to do about that. He thinks he's about to have an argument with someone who's going to be defensive or will be attacking him, and she offers him, an olive branch, and he doesn't know what to do with it. So the relationship between them is very much like how over time two human beings from such different worlds can try and find a connection to each other. And it's companionship, and it's respect, and it's also fully embracing the complexities of each other, and also having definitely a romantic attraction to each other.
And a lot of the intimacy in the miniseries, in addition to between Margaret and Mr. Wilcox, is also between the female characters in the story. Margaret with Ruth, and of course Margaret and her sister Helen. Do you think this is also really kind of a love story about those women connecting to each other?
I'd say the relationship between the women is the central relationships, is the most important relationships in the story. More so than between Margaret and Henry, because you have at the center of it the two sisters who are different sides of the same coin, and they grow and develop together, and they navigate this world together, and they allow each other, at times maybe Helen not so much, but relatively speaking, they allow each other to change and investigate, new ideas, and new ways of relating to the world and to other people. And there's conflict within them, in that Helen doesn't believe that the Wilcoxes are a good family, and they are so different to how the Schlegels have been brought up. And Margaret's going, but she sees something fine in Henry that's worth pursuing, and so there's honest kind of bickering back and forth between them, very kind of I think very quite realistic dynamic between two sisters. But to have a relationship that's on screen between two women who are not pitted against each other, who are not solely led by the relationships with the men in their lives. And then also this kind of tonic and yet strange love affair between Ruth Wilcox and Margaret Schlegel. It's that's the kind of the beating heart of the whole piece.
The novel was written more than a century ago, the film about a quarter century ago. How do you hope this version of Howard's End will resonate with viewers in 2018?
Well, I think what the production's done well is to transcend its genre, in that the period is a backdrop to the story. And classics are called classics because they transcend their time, they're timeless, and they deal with human relationships and human emotions that are universal, and that we can still relate to. So it's a very accessible production between sisters, and you have in it these women who are limited by the social system of the time, but also women today have their own limitations. And you have Margaret and Helen who are fighting that very elegantly and patiently, and trying to still remain independent of the expectation of others, and are trying to remain open-minded and to be self-educated. They wouldn't have been able to have the kind of education that their brother has when he was going off to Oxford. So they have to have natural inquiring minds. They have to read lots of books. They have to engage with the world in front of them. They have to be active in their thinking in order to be able to educate themselves and to grow and to look after themselves, really. And that's something that we women relate to today, of remaining limited, and maybe in certain, less so than we were, but there are still certain expectations that society puts on us that are very difficult sometimes to overcome, whether it be how we should look or expectations of what we should do, or that we should be, the illusion that we can do everything from being the perfect wife and the mother, but also the career woman and the femme fatale versus the, kind of the earth mother. There are so many kind of archetypes that women are presented with now, that there is something to be gained from the Schlegels, who throughout the story remain true to themselves and live with integrity as much as they can, but also with all the contradictions and hypocrisies and faults that everyone has.
Now, a lot of the TV work and the film work you've done over the course of your career has happened to be in period films and TV shows, from literary adaptations like this to even Agent Carter in the Marvel universe. Are you especially drawn to stories about history or the past, or is that how the opportunities have just happened to come about through a lot of your career?
Yeah, it's just how the opportunities have come about. Maybe I don't know. Maybe it's my face. My face looks of another time. I don't know. I've done modern plays, and I've done Black Mirror, which was, jeans and a jumper. It wasn't a sweater, as you guys say. I do like literary adaptations because I like reading, so I love language, and I love plays because it's in Britain there's an emphasis on the writing and the writer and the reverence for that and the craft of it, and maybe so it kind of I naturally gravitate towards things that hopefully are more kind of writer-led than they are, I don't know, plot-driven, I suppose. That right kind of nuance of character, maybe. Yeah, it's hard to say. Hard to see myself kind of that objectively.
And you appeared in multiple Marvel projects as Agent Carter. That character actually passed away in the film Captain America: Civil War at age 95. But in the Marvel universe, flashbacks and time travel are probably not out of the question. So is that a character you'd be open to revisiting even more of, or exploring more of in the future?
Yeah, I'm very grateful to Marvel of what that did for me, and I loved playing her, and I loved the freedom that they gave me to just get on with it, making her my own, to be part of such a huge franchise like that, but still feel like it was very much led by human beings who love what they did, as opposed to a kind of a corporate world of, a kind of a machine. It was a very positive environment to work in. So yeah, for that reason, I wouldn't rule it out but I'd have to kind of feel like there was more to say. There wasn't just playing her for the sake of it, that there was other parts of her that I could explore, or different ways that I could, just make her kind of develop, really. It's a very weird thing to be revisiting a character, because as an actor you do a job and then you move on to the next one, and it's very seldom that you go back and explore a character in a different kind of world or a different kind of setting. So it's kind of quite a surreal experience, really.
Yeah, it'd be almost like taking Margaret Schlegel and moving her to the modern times, like maybe she's cryogenically frozen with Captain America.
It's anything is possible with Marvel. Who knows? Yeah.
Well, I want to congratulate you on Howard's End, and thank you very much for talking with me today.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me. Have a good day.